What if I told you that some of the most celebrated legends we pass down through history weren't born out of pure imagination, but were built deliberately over the ruins of uncomfortable truths? Imagine a tale so powerful that entire civilizations carried it like a torch, yet underneath the story's shine, there was something messy, something human, something its tellers wanted buried forever. Today we are digging into a legend that didn't just survive time, it was carefully shaped to hide what really happened. Picture this opening: a desolate dig site in the burning sun. The soil is cracked, the tools rusted, but then a hand brushes away dirt and reveals a fragment of carved stone. Its surface is faintly scratched by time, yet still readable. An inscription that does not match the grand version of the story everyone knows. That moment is when the myth starts to fracture, when the truth dares to push its way back into the light. Before we unravel this, make sure you join the journey by subscribing to the channel. It is one click, but it tells me you want more investigations like this. It is also your way of helping us shine a light on the stories buried deep under legend. Drop a comment too, because I want to know how far around the world this curiosity travels. Now let us rewind. The myth begins in the language of victory. Heroes who were noble battles that were glorious kings who never stumbled. In short, a script written to look flawless. If you hear the story from official sources, you would never imagine blood spilled in betrayal or the shame of leaders making mistakes. But here is the uncomfortable fact. Legends are often political tools. They were written to inspire unity, to rally soldiers, to glorify rulers, or to erase embarrassing episodes. If a ruler lost a battle, the story might transform it into a test of divine patience. If a treaty collapsed, it might become an omen sent by the gods. In other words, truth was not erased, it was buried. The case we are examining today is an ancient civilization that built its reputation not just on what it achieved, but on what it chose to hide. The legend of this people was polished like gold, while the reality was fragmented like pottery shards scattered in the dirt. And centuries later, archaeologists digging through that dirt began to notice how the shine of myth and the grit of evidence did not match. Take, for example, the construction of certain monumental temples. The legend told that they were built in one perfect sweep by a great king, guided by divine command. The truth uncovered through soil layers and carbon samples tells a different story. The temples were rebuilt and rebuilt, sometimes after collapses caused by earthquakes, other times after enemy sieges. Each rebuild was written over with inscriptions praising divine will instead of admitting destruction. So the myth was born, not to deceive, but to maintain the illusion of order and permanence. The deeper you look, the more you notice this pattern. The story says heroes willingly sacrificed themselves for their people, but the bones in mass graves show violence at a scale that doesn't fit noble endings. The story says trade flowed like rivers of prosperity, yet archaeologists find evidence of shortages, of famine, of desperate imports that kept the society afloat. The story says one king ruled by divine favor for decades, when in reality the throne passed through assassinations, civil disputes, and desperate treaties. The legend is neat, the truth is chaos. Now imagine yourself as an ordinary person living back then. You would not read academic footnotes. You would hear the polished version in rituals, festivals, songs. The truth wouldn't matter to your daily survival. The legend gave you pride. It gave you something to believe in. That is why the buried truth could be forgotten for so long. People preferred the beautiful lie. But truth has a stubborn way of clawing back through the cracks. Inscriptions unearthed that contradict official records. Tablets describing lost battles when myths sang of victories. Weapons buried hastily, as though defeat had forced sudden abandonment. Each find chips away at the wall built around the legend. Here is a gripping example. One story described a famous leader's death as a noble sacrifice on the battlefield. Archaeologists, however, found a skeleton in a hidden chamber near the palace. A body pierced not by enemy weapons, but by what looked like assassination marks from within the city. That discovery suggests betrayal within the leader's own ranks, a truth too shameful to celebrate, so it was wrapped in myth. Instead of a victim of palace intrigue, he was turned into a hero who faced the enemy bravely until his last breath. This is where the story becomes more than archaeology. It becomes psychological. Humans do not just record history, they curate it. They decide which moments shine and which moments rot in silence. Myths are not lies in the usual sense. They are carefully edited truths. And when the editing is extreme, the truth gets buried so deeply that generations cannot tell where reality ends and invention begins. Let us pause and ask a question. Why do people cling to myths even when evidence rises against them? The answer is identity. Myths are not just stories. They are mirrors in which nations and cultures see themselves. To admit that the mirror is cracked is to admit that your identity is built on shaky ground. That is why the buried truth is often fought against, even when it is staring us in the face. Archaeologists in the last century faced this problem firsthand. Some of them risked their careers to publish inconvenient finds. A burnt layer that suggested defeat instead of triumph. A foreign inscription that claimed victory over a people who swore they were never conquered. These details threatened the legend, so institutions downplayed them. Sometimes entire digs were quietly forgotten. Museums hid controversial artifacts in basements. Legends were easier to display than messy truths. But the tide shifts once evidence accumulates. You can hide one tablet, not 100. You can dismiss one burned layer, not a whole city scarred by fire. When overwhelming proof rises, the myth begins to wobble. That is where we stand today, with a story told for thousands of years as glorious now looking suspiciously like camouflage for human mistakes. The shocking twist is this. The more evidence surfaces, the more powerful the myth feels rather than less, because people love tension. The idea that something was deliberately buried makes the legend juicier. It adds mystery and gives modern audiences a sense of discovery. It is not just a tale anymore, it is a puzzle, and we are the ones piecing it together. And that is what makes this video different. We are not simply recounting an ancient war or a heroic tale. We are interrogating the machinery that turned messy human events into legend. We are lifting the stones to see what was hidden under them. So the hook is clear. They buried the truth and built a legend, but the legend did not vanish. It grew mighty until it defined cultures. The question is not just what was hidden, but why. Stay with me, because in the next section we will go deeper. We will walk through the timeline piece by piece from the ancient inscriptions to modern science. We will put the myth side by side with evidence. We will reveal the artifacts that shook historians and the names scratched into tablets that no one expected. We will also confront the biggest question of all. Did the people who shaped the myth know they were hiding the truth, or were they simply telling the version of the story they needed to survive? We left the story with a simple but heavy question. Did the people who shaped these myths know they were burying the truth, or were they telling themselves a version of events that felt survivable? To answer that, we need to examine not only the past, but the psychology of myth-making itself. Start with the inscriptions carved into temple walls. These were not simply records, they were propaganda in stone. Their audience was not future archaeologists, but the citizens who walked by every day. Every story about gods granting victory, every omission of defeat was a deliberate performance. Think of it as the ancient version of curated social media. The filters were applied so often that the raw image of history became unrecognizable. The legend was the feed everyone scrolled through, while the truth stayed hidden in the drafts folder. This raises an uncomfortable point for us today. The same mechanism that buried truth thousands of years ago still works now. Stories are edited, curated, polished, to present strength, not weakness. To discover truth, you have to dig both literally and metaphorically. That is why archaeology feels so electric. Every artifact is not just an object, it is a counterpoint to a dominant story. Take the discovery of an archive of clay tablets found in the ruins of a palace. These tablets contained routine records, taxes, trade agreements, marriage contracts. But tucked among them were accounts of conflict missing from the grand myths. One described soldiers retreating, another mentioned shortages of grain. These little scribbles on clay contradict the sweeping epic songs sung at festivals. They show us that daily life recorded in boring detail often tells more truth than the grand performance of legend. Now let us zoom out to the broader context. When we talk about buried truths, we often imagine deliberate conspiracies, shadowy scribes rewriting history, but sometimes the truth is lost simply because people preferred not to remember. Trauma gets mythologized. Pain gets polished into poetry. Wars that left communities shattered are remembered as heroic victories to ease collective grief. This is less about lies and more about survival. Myths, in that sense, act like scar tissue protecting a culture from wounds too raw to carry openly. But archaeology has no sympathy. It shows the bones, the ash layers, the broken walls. It shows famine in charred grains, or a desperate migration in pottery styles, changing abruptly across regions. It shows slaughter in the mass graves of unburied soldiers. These are truths myths would never dare to sing, yet they sit there waiting for anyone willing to look. The most fascinating part of this story is when myth and truth actually meet in the middle. For example, a famous legend might describe a great flood sent by angry gods. Modern excavations in the region then uncover evidence of a catastrophic flood layer, dated roughly to the same period. Did the gods send it? No. But did people experience a flood so traumatic it demanded to be remembered? Yes. The myth buries some details, but preserves the scar. That scar becomes evidence. And this is where we turn to the legend at the heart of our story, the one that was shaped so carefully that generations accepted it as untouchable. The legend painted a war of glory, a king of divine favor, and a city destined to shine forever. But the truth we now hold in our hands says otherwise. The war was messy, driven by politics and trade routes. The king was assassinated, not exalted. The city was scarred by famine and fire, not blessed with endless prosperity. That truth was too painful, so it was buried under the marble of myth. What does this mean for us today? It means legends are double-edged. They inspire, but they also conceal. To consume them blindly is to accept the edited version of reality. To dig beneath them is to face the raw material of history. The decision is ours, but the real adventure lies in the digging. Now let us talk about how modern technology deepens the cracks in the legend. Tools like ground-penetrating radar drones, mapping ancient sites, and isotope analysis of bones. They allow us to see past the edits. We can now tell what people ate, where they traveled, even what diseases they carried. All of this paints a picture far richer than the myths, and often far more tragic. For example, one study of skeletal remains revealed malnutrition at a time when legends claimed abundance. That single fact flips the story from divine favor to desperate survival. This brings us to the climax of our narrative, the artifact that shattered the illusion. Once displayed as proof of glory, a golden mask was long thought to belong to a legendary king. Its discovery was hailed as validation of myth. But later, scientific testing revealed it was older than the supposed king by centuries. A treasure, yes, but not the treasure. The entire myth had been pinned to the wrong chapter of history. That revelation was like a lightning bolt splitting the story in half. It proved myths can be built on real artifacts, yet still bury the truth beneath a seductive headline. So was the legend a lie? Or was it simply a story told the way people needed it at the time? The answer is both. Myths are lies told with the sincerity of belief. They bury details, not to deceive maliciously, but to protect identity, to heal shame, to glorify survival. The truth only re-emerges when centuries of soil and science strip the story back to bone. Now let us reflect on why this matters. When you realize myths are built on buried truths, you start to question more than ancient legends. You start to wonder about the stories we tell today. Which of our current legends are built to inspire but conceal? Which truths are being buried under polished headlines and patriotic slogans? 1,000 years from now, will archaeologists dig up our ruins and say the same thing, that we buried the truth and built a legend? Here is a powerful way to end this journey. Imagine standing in the museum where the golden mask is displayed. Tourists snap photos awed by the legend. But you now know the buried truth. The mask is not what they think. It is older, messier, more complicated. Yet its presence here still inspires wonder. That is the paradox. Myths and truths can live side by side, both powerful, both human. And so our story closes, not with certainty but with perspective. The myth was dazzling, the truth was uncomfortable. Together they reveal something timeless about us. We crave stories that shine even when reality is cracked beneath them. So the next time you hear a tale of flawless heroes or divine victories, ask yourself, what truth might be buried underneath? What details were too fragile to survive in daylight? What pain was polished into legend? That curiosity is the torch you carry now. They buried the truth and built a legend, but now we dig. And what we find is not just history, it is humanity in its rawest form. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe and share it. We are only scratching the surface of how myths and reality collide, and the next story might just change how you see everything you thought you knew. Drop a comment. Was it wrong for the ancients to bury the truth, or was it the only way they could survive? I want to hear what you think.